Jen had always known there was something more waiting for her. Not because she was told, not because she read it in a horoscope, but because every fiber of her being tingled with the tension between who she was and who she could become. Her life up to this point had been a patchwork of almosts. Almost enough money, almost enough confidence, almost enough clarity. But deep down, buried beneath the clutter of self-doubt, she sensed a force, wild and electric, begging her to tap in. Her journey didn't start with enlightenment. It started in a rented apartment with overdue bills and a habit of sabotaging her own greatness. Jen knew how to crack jokes and downplay her dreams. She told herself stories to stay small. People like me don't get rich, or that's for people with connections. The voice in her head was loud and persistent, an uninvited roommate who showed up with every opportunity and whispered, "You're not good enough." But something shifted. Not with a bolt of lightning, not in a dramatic breakthrough, but in a slow, building awareness. Jen began to notice the patterns, the excuses, the way she had built a home inside her limitations and decorated it with fear. One night, she stared at the ceiling fan as it spun lazily overhead and asked herself a question that echoed louder than any self-help book could. What if I stopped believing all this crap I tell myself? That question didn't just haunt her, it dared her. It dared her to imagine life beyond survival, beyond hustle, beyond the hollow thrill of mediocrity. And so she made a decision. Not to change everything overnight, but to become aware. That was her first act of rebellion. Awareness. She started to study energy, not just the quantum buzzwords or crystals in a gift shop, but the magnetic charge that we all carry. Jen realized that our thoughts weren't just ideas floating in space, they were frequencies. Every time she said, "I suck at money," the universe tuned its station to match that signal. Her bank account echoed her beliefs. Her relationships mirrored her self-worth. It wasn't punishment, it was alignment. That was her second awakening, like attracts like. Jen saw that the universe didn't care if she was rich or broke. It simply responded to what she believed she was. She started to experiment. She wrote affirmations, not because they sounded good, but because they felt impossible. "I love money," she wrote on Post-its and slapped them on her mirror. It felt like a lie at first. But day after day, the repetition started to chip away at the rusted cage around her self-image. Jen embraced the awkwardness. She danced alone in her room. She visualized checks arriving in the mail. She spoke kind things to herself even when her bank balance said, "insufficient funds." And little by little, something cracked open. Opportunities appeared, small at first, but undeniable. Clients who found her website, friends who introduced her to mentors, a growing sense of momentum. But transformation isn't linear. Jen faced resistance, not from the world, but from within. Her old self didn't go quietly. That voice still whispered, "Who do you think you are?" And every time she stretched into a new version of herself, fear wrapped around her ankles like vines. That's when she discovered the power of decision, not hesitation, not bargaining, but full body, no turning back, screw the house decision. She didn't wait to feel ready. She decided to be ready. Jen wrote a check to herself for $5,000 she didn't have and framed it. She said yes to expensive coaching programs before knowing how she'd pay. She leaned into the fear and felt it transform into exhilaration. She stopped playing victim to her circumstances. Instead, she treated her thoughts like tenants. Some got to stay, others were evicted. "I'm terrible with money" was replaced with "I'm open to abundance." "I never finish anything" became "I'm a badass in motion." She noticed how even the tiniest mental shift could open floodgates. Jen saw that loving yourself wasn't just about bubble baths or spa days. It was about boundaries, bravery, and belief. Loving yourself meant saying no to what drained her and yes to what lit her up, even when it didn't make sense to anyone else. One of her biggest breakthroughs came in a moment of stillness. No fireworks, no choir of angels, just quiet. She realized that she had spent most of her life waiting for permission, from parents, society, even from the mirror. And in that stillness, she gave herself what no one else could, permission to be extraordinary. She started to see how her identity had been constructed from scraps of other people's fears. A teacher who once said she wasn't a good writer, a boyfriend who mocked her ambition, a world that celebrated hustle but mocked magic. But now she had the tools to rebuild. She replaced those bricks of shame with declarations of power. Jen didn't want to live a life where she simply endured. She wanted a life that set her on fire. That meant facing the beliefs that kept her small. She journaled relentlessly, uncovering stories she didn't even know she was telling. I'm too old. I'm not creative. I always mess things up. Each one became a target, and every time she rewrote a story, she felt lighter. She embraced what she called source energy. Call it God, the universe, spirit, it didn't matter. What mattered was knowing she wasn't alone. She wasn't doing this on grit alone. She was co-creating with something vast, intelligent, and loving. When doubt crept in, she remembered she was a divine being having a human experience. Her environment changed too. She stopped spending time with people who complained, who stayed stuck, who mocked dreams. She surrounded herself with believers, people who cheered her on, challenged her, inspired her. She understood that energy was contagious and she chose to catch the good kind. Jen learned to receive. This was the hardest part. She had no problem giving time, effort, support, but receiving felt selfish, until she realized that refusing abundance was just another form of ego. By allowing herself to receive, she modeled possibility. She showed others what was possible when you said yes to yourself. Money became a mirror. It reflected her beliefs, her worth, her willingness. She stopped treating it as evil or greedy. She started blessing her bills, thanking her bank account, celebrating every deposit, no matter how small. Money wasn't the enemy, it was a tool, and she was finally learning how to wield it. Jen didn't change overnight, but she changed, radically, beautifully. She stood taller, spoke louder, dreamed bigger. She became magnetic not because she was perfect, but because she was real. She owned her story, scars and all, and used it as fuel. Her message wasn't just, "You are a badass." It was, "You always were." Her job was to remind people of what they already knew, deep down, that they were powerful, worthy, capable, that the only thing standing between them and the life they craved was belief. She became proof that it was never too late, that you could start broke, lost, confused, and still build a life that made you giddy, that you didn't have to wait until you had it all figured out. You just had to start, and so she kept going, writing, teaching, speaking, not from a pedestal, but from the trenches. Her journey wasn't finished, but it was vibrant, alive, and full of purpose. And that, she realized, was what being a badass was all about. The morning Jen decided to fully surrender to the unknown wasn't dramatic. There were no camera crews, no epiphanies under sunrise skies, just a coffee-stained journal page and a gut feeling that said, "Enough waiting." She wrote the words, "I choose to thrive," circled them 3 times, and let that be her new direction. The page wasn't magical, but the commitment was. She no longer needed evidence before belief. She understood now. Belief was the soil, not the fruit. She couldn't wait to see results to start acting like someone who believed. She had to act from faith, not fear. That meant showing up boldly, even when logic told her to retreat. That meant leaning into the bizarre truth that energy is everything and that every thought, every word, every choice either aligns with your desires or repels them. Jen got clear about clarity. Not the kind where every step is plotted, but the kind where the next step feels exciting. She realized she didn't need to know all 50 steps ahead. She just needed to trust the next one, and then the next. Like stepping stones across foggy water, the path would reveal itself with motion. She understood now that indecision was the ultimate dream killer. It wasn't fear, or lack of time, or money. It was hesitation, waffling, waiting for guarantees. But transformation doesn't come with guarantees. It comes with guts. She began to decide quickly whether to go, stay, buy, sell, leave, or leap. She trusted her gut and moved. That decisiveness sharpened her intuition and made her magnetic to the very opportunities she once begged for. Fear still whispered, of course, but Jen began to hear it differently. She stopped trying to silence it and started to translate it. Fear wasn't saying, "Don't go." It was saying, "You're on the edge of something new." She stopped treating fear like a stop sign and started treating it like a green light. That switch changed everything. Jen began to play with the edges of her comfort zone. She said yes to speaking gigs that made her hands tremble. She posted boldly online, even when she feared judgment. She launched programs before they were perfect, and each time, the fear diminished. Not because she was suddenly fearless, but because she became someone who acted anyway. She learned that perfectionism was just procrastination in stilettos. It dressed itself as ambition but kept her safe. So she let go of the need to have it all figured out. She gave herself permission to be messy, to learn publicly, to evolve in real time. It was terrifying and liberating. Money became a dance partner. Jen stopped treating it like a monster under the bed. She stopped hiding from her bank statements, stopped dreading tax season, stopped believing money was some scarce, shameful thing. She began to treat money as a friend. She spoke kindly about it, welcomed it, expected it. She didn't wait to feel wealthy. She acted like someone who respected her financial life. She tracked every dollar, not from fear, but from awareness. She started tipping more generously, giving to causes she believed in, and investing in herself without apology. She saw now that how she treated money reflected how she treated herself. If she hoarded, she signaled fear. If she invested, she signaled trust. And the universe responded accordingly. She noticed the way people talked about money. Friends who said, "I could never afford that," or "That's just too expensive." She realized those words weren't about the price. They were about the belief. So she changed her language. Instead of, "I can't afford it," she'd say, "How can I make it happen?" That shift opened possibilities where before there were only walls. Jen remembered a moment when she stood in front of a luxury hotel lobby, deciding whether to walk in and order a drink. She hesitated. It wasn't about the drink. It was about feeling like she didn't belong. But she walked in anyway. She sat at the bar, ordered sparkling water, and soaked in the abundance. She didn't have to be rich to align with wealth. She just had to believe she belonged in the room. She started visualizing with intensity, not just daydreaming, but rehearsing success in her mind like an athlete. She saw herself walking across stages, checking her bank balance with joy, living in her dream home. She added emotion to the images, letting the joy of those moments flood her body. She didn't wait to feel successful. She trained her energy to become a match for it. She stopped asking, "How will it happen?" and started declaring, "It will happen." That shift in language changed the frequency. She let go of needing to control the method and focused on becoming the version of herself who already had the thing. And things started to move. Emails, referrals, invitations, doors opened. Not because she chased them, but because she rose to their level. Jen got serious about self-love. Not the hashtag kind, but the deep, radical, no matter what kind. She wrote love letters to her body. She forgave herself for every misstep, every missed chance, every harsh word. She looked in the mirror and said, "You are enough," until it stopped feeling like a lie. She stopped tolerating mediocrity. She raised her standards, not just for money, but for friendship, creativity, energy. She became unavailable for drama, gossip, and low-vibe habits. She surrounded herself with people who lit up when she walked in the room, who celebrated her wins, who reminded her of her power when she forgot. She started treating time like a sacred resource. She stopped wasting hours scrolling or stressing. She realized that her dream life wasn't going to build itself. Every hour counted. So she got clear on her priorities and built her days around them. Writing, coaching, reading, moving, creating. The life she wanted became the life she lived, one aligned choice at a time. Jen fell in love with discomfort. She knew now that growth didn't feel good, but it always led to good. She welcomed the awkwardness of pitching herself, the vulnerability of asking for help, the exhaustion of trying again. Every moment of discomfort was a brick in the foundation of her badassery. She let go of needing to be liked. That was one of the final chains. She realized that living for approval was like living in a cage with invisible bars. So she stopped editing herself, stopped shrinking her dreams to make others comfortable. She told the truth, took up space, and attracted people who loved her not despite her fire, but because of it. Jen saw that comparison was poison. Every time she looked sideways at someone else's success, she dimmed her own light. So she stopped scrolling and started celebrating. She blessed every wealthy woman she saw, every bestseller she held, every dream someone else had made real. Because their win meant her win was possible too. She began to trust timing. She stopped rushing, stopped panicking when things didn't happen by a certain age or deadline. She leaned into divine timing, knowing that what was meant for her wouldn't pass her by. She released the need to control and stepped into surrender, not passive waiting, but active faith. She became a student of gratitude, not just for the big things, but for the tiny glimmers, the morning sun through her window, the perfect cup of coffee, a kind word from a stranger. She trained her eyes to see the abundance already present, and the more she noticed, the more it grew. Jen stepped fully into her purpose, not because she had all the credentials or the perfect plan, but because she finally said yes to herself. She stopped seeking permission and started leading. She knew now that her story, her voice, her truth were medicine for someone else. So she shared them, raw and real. She saw that life responded to courage, that every time she leapt, the net appeared. Not always instantly, not always the way she imagined, but always. She trusted that she was supported, that she wasn't here by accident, that she had work to do, and so she did it, with grit, grace, and glitter. Her life wasn't perfect. She still had fears. She still stumbled. But she no longer made those things mean she was unworthy. She was human. And human was enough. She became the kind of woman she once envied. Not because of fame or followers, but because of how she showed up. Authentically, boldly, on purpose. She didn't need to prove anything. She simply became who she already was. She looked back at the woman who once doubted herself, and she didn't feel shame. She felt awe. Because that woman had been brave enough to start, brave enough to believe, brave enough to keep going. Jen had become a living, breathing testament to the truth that you are powerful beyond measure, that the life you want wants you, that everything changes when you decide to remember who you are, and she kept rising. Because once you taste freedom, you can't go back. Jen stood in front of the room, palms slightly damp, heart steady with purpose. The stage wasn't grand, the lights weren't blinding, but something about the moment was electric. She had been invited to speak at a local workshop, a room filled with people just like she had once been, stuck, hopeful, skeptical, and for the first time she realized she no longer needed their validation. She was there to serve, not to prove. Before, she might have softened her truth, cushioned her message. Now she stood tall in her story, because her story was real. It was messy, non-linear, full of detours and comebacks. And in that messiness, there was medicine. She had turned her journey into a map, not to follow step by step, but to inspire others to draw their own. Jen understood now. There is no right way. There is only your way. And the more you trust it, the louder it becomes. She had spent years chasing formulas, seeking mentors, investing in courses, not because she lacked ambition, but because she didn't trust herself. But each voice she followed outside herself eventually led her back inward. Her power had never been out there. It had always been inside, beneath the doubt, the noise, the shame. And when she stopped running from herself, she found what she had always been searching for: alignment. Alignment wasn't about perfection. It was about integrity, acting in harmony with what she truly wanted, not what others expected. It meant saying yes only when it felt like expansion. It meant saying no even when it disappointed others. It meant living like her soul was the CEO. She had become a woman who honored her intuition, not as a backup plan, but as the guiding GPS. She listened when her body said rest. She moved when inspiration struck. She didn't force. She flowed. And because of that, her creativity exploded. She wrote more, created more, connected more. She stopped chasing clients and started attracting them. She stopped cold pitching and started showing up fully. Her work was no longer about selling. It was about sharing. It was no longer about hustle. It was about resonance. She became magnetic, not because of tactics, but because of truth. Jen realized that authenticity was her superpower, that being fully herself was the most powerful marketing strategy in the world. And so, she dropped the mask, the online persona, the curated perfection. She showed up with messy hair and raw honesty, and people listened. Not because she was polished, but because she was real. She stopped editing herself for approval. She wrote blog posts with swear words and soul. She sent newsletters that felt like love letters. She built a brand around her being, not a logo. And the more she leaned into her uniqueness, the more success she created. She taught herself and others that abundance is our birthright, that we don't earn worthiness through struggle, that we don't need to sacrifice our joy to make a living. She had once believed that hard work was the price of prosperity. Now she knew that aligned work was the gateway to overflow. She learned to work smarter, not harder, to delegate, to automate, to prioritize. She stopped glorifying burnout and started honoring boundaries. Her mornings became sacred. Meditation, movement, journaling, not as tasks but as rituals. She built her days around her energy, not around expectations. She looked around and saw how many people were still trapped, not by circumstance but by belief. They thought success was for others. They thought wealth was selfish. They thought self-love was indulgent. And so, she kept sharing. Not to convince, but to invite. Not to instruct, but to reflect. She knew now the world didn't need more people playing small. It needed more people owning their brilliance. It needed more people turning on their lights so others could see what's possible. Jen understood that judgment was inevitable, that the more visible she became, the more opinions she attracted. But she had become immune, not because she didn't feel it, but because she didn't let it lead her. She knew that being disliked was the price of being bold, and she was willing to pay it. She became a master at holding duality, fear and courage, doubt and faith, rest and ambition. She didn't need to wait until she felt fully ready. She learned to act while scared, to launch while unsure, to move while messy, because perfection is an illusion. Progress is the magic. She began to see everything as feedback, not failure. A low launch? Feedback. An awkward post? Feedback. A no from a client? Feedback. And with that, she stopped making rejection personal. She stopped spiraling. She started adjusting, growing, evolving. She stopped attaching her worth to outcomes. Whether she made $5,000 or $5,000 that month didn't determine her value. Her value was inherent, non-negotiable, eternal. And when she lived from that truth, her results expanded naturally. She created money with ease, not because she cracked some code, but because she stopped resisting. She removed shame. She removed guilt. She stopped undercharging and over-delivering. She stopped calling herself bad with money. She started calling herself abundant, capable, deserving, and the money responded. She stopped trying to save people. She no longer sacrificed her peace to help others avoid discomfort. She understood that everyone has their path, that growth requires struggle, that her job was not to fix, but to lead by example. She coached with compassion and firmness. She didn't coddle. She didn't sugarcoat. She held people to their power. And in doing so, she reminded herself of her own. She practiced receiving on deeper levels. Compliments, help, praise, support. She allowed herself to be celebrated, to be seen, to be held. She stopped pretending she could do it all alone. She stopped equating independence with isolation. She let love in. Not just romantic love, but community, friendship, divine love. She started praying with her whole heart, not because she was religious, but because she trusted that something bigger had her back. She no longer prayed out of desperation. She prayed from gratitude, from trust, from knowing. She healed her inner child, not by digging through every wound, but by reparenting herself in the present. She gave herself what she had long craved: validation, safety, encouragement. She stopped abandoning herself. She stopped gaslighting herself. She started believing herself. She saw now the inner critic was just an outdated voice. It was scared. It meant well. But it wasn't in charge anymore. She let her higher self take the mic, the part of her that remembered who she was, the part that believed in magic. Jen became proof. Proof that reinvention is possible, that the past doesn't dictate the future, that the limits we live with are usually self-imposed. She became the kind of woman who others whispered about, not because of scandal, but because of inspiration. People said, she changed, and she smiled, because she had, and she would keep changing, because evolution was her birthright. She walked through life with a new mantra. Everything is always working out for me, even when it didn't look like it, even when things fell apart, even when it hurt. She trusted the unfolding. She trusted the detours. She trusted herself. Her life wasn't luck. It was a series of brave choices, daily decisions, inner work, outer action. She didn't wait for miracles. She created the conditions for them. She wasn't fearless. She was fierce, and that made all the difference. Jen walked barefoot along the shoreline, her toes sinking into wet sand as waves curled and whispered along the edge. The sun hadn't yet climbed above the horizon, but the sky was already blushing with color. This had become her ritual, a slow, quiet moment with nature before the world stirred awake. She didn't need to do this. She chose to. Because now every part of her life was a choice. Not an obligation, not a reaction, but a conscious creation. She had come to understand that freedom wasn't about doing whatever you want, whenever you want. It was about alignment, about choosing only what resonated, about letting go of guilt and choosing joy over and over. She had once believed that ease was lazy, that struggle was noble. Now she saw that flow required more courage than fight. It took strength to stop forcing and start trusting. She was no longer hustling for her worth. She knew who she was. A force, a light, a badass with divine backing. She looked back at the timeline of her life, the detours, the heartbreaks, the failed jobs, the broke months, the nights she cried on the bathroom floor, and saw them with gratitude, not regret. Each moment had shaped her, had cracked her open, had pulled her closer to truth. None of it was wasted. Not the confusion, not the pain, not even the mistakes. She no longer saw failure as the end. She saw it as redirection, a sacred GPS recalibrating her towards something better. Each rejection became protection. Each loss became an initiation. Each breakdown became a breakthrough in disguise. Jen had become someone who wasn't afraid to begin again. She knew that transformation didn't happen once, it happened endlessly. She had let go of linear paths, 5-year plans, and step-by-step formulas. She had fallen in love with reinvention, with trying new things, with pivoting, with surprising herself. She no longer feared outgrowing people. She understood that growth meant movement. Not everyone would come with her, and that was okay. Some connections had an expiration date. Some were chapters, not epics. She had learned to release with love, not resentment. And in doing so, she created space for soul-aligned relationships. Her circle now was intentional. People who challenged her to rise, who held her to her highest, who celebrated the parts of her that once made her feel too much. She was no longer shrinking. She was no longer dimming her light to make others comfortable. She owned her voice, loudly, clearly, without apology. She stopped hiding, stopped deflecting, stopped denying compliments with nervous laughter. She said, "Thank you," and let it land. She said, "I'm proud of myself," and meant it. She said, "I love my life," and felt it in her bones. She became her own best friend, her own hype woman, her own healer. She wasn't waiting anymore, not for perfect timing, not for permission, not for proof. She was living, fully, fiercely, now. Her work expanded, not just in income, but in impact. She served from overflow, not depletion. Her business no longer felt like a grind. It felt like art, like service, like purpose on fire. She stopped chasing trends and leaned deeper into her truth. She trusted that her message would land where it was meant to, that her story would reach the hearts that needed it. She wasn't here to convince anyone. She was here to be a lighthouse. She had redefined success, not by how much she earned, but by how alive she felt. Not by how busy she was, but by how peaceful she felt. Not by her schedule, but by her soul. She made room for stillness, for play, for presence. She danced more, laughed more, rested more. She stopped earning rest and started honoring it. She had learned the art of surrender, not as giving up, but as releasing control. Letting go of the need to micromanage the universe. Trusting the divine choreography behind the scenes. She saw magic in the mundane, in the breeze on her face, in a stranger's smile, in the alignment of a green light when she needed it. She no longer dismissed synchronicities as coincidences. She saw them as winks from the universe. She had stopped living in someday. She lived in now. She didn't postpone joy. She didn't wait to celebrate. She didn't delay the decision. She acted with urgency, with intention, with fire. Her goals had evolved. It wasn't just about income anymore. It was about impact, about legacy, about showing others what's possible. She wanted every woman, every soul, every dreamer who heard her words to feel one thing: hope. She didn't tell people what to do. She reminded them of who they were. She said, "You are powerful. You are worthy. You are capable. You are divine." She said, "You get to have more. You get to change your mind. You get to rise." She said, "You are a badass." And she believed it with every fiber of her being. She had cracked the code, not through strategy, but through surrender. Not through striving, but through self-love. Not through hustle, but through healing. She had created a life that felt like her. that fit her soul like a second skin. And it wasn't because she was lucky. It was because she decided. She decided to stop settling. She decided to rise. She decided to believe. She had faced herself, sat with herself, chosen herself. And now she shined, not from ego, but from essence. She had tapped into her power. And once she did, there was no turning back, because now she knew the truth. You are not broken. You are not too late. You are not too much. You are a badass, and your only job is to act like it. Thank you for joining us on this deep and transformative journey. In a world racing forward at lightning speed, the only true advantage is the ability to adapt, to grow, and to learn continuously. We hope this audiobook inspired you to challenge your comfort zone, embrace reflection, and become a lifelong learner. If this resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Victory Think, your destination for powerful book insights, one story at a time. Stay curious, keep evolving, and see you in the next story.